good evening. There's one overriding question that emerges from today's revelations about secret Swiss bank accounts and tax evasion. It's whether we're more tolerant of the rich evading tax than we are of ordinary people and their misdemeanors. After all, we knew about thousands of people who had secret bank accounts in 2010, but there's only been one prosecution. Why? Why did we then sign a deal with Switzerland that substantially had the effect of decriminalising tax evasion via that country? Why, indeed, do we tolerate money going to unregistered bank accounts and to tax havens at all? Are we a soft touch? Here's Duncan Weldon.
HSBC has helped wealthy clients across the world evade millions of pounds in tax. The BBC, The Guardian, Le Monde, and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists have seen documents outlining how over 100,000 clients, almost 7,000 of them in the UK, held accounts in Switzerland. Not all of those clients were engaged in tax evasion, but some certainly were. The bank now faces criminal investigations in the United States, France, Belgium, and Argentina, but not here in the UK. Are we a soft touch when it comes to white-collar tax evasion schemes?
What's disappointing has been the lack of pressure from the UK government, particularly the lack of prosecutions of UK residents who've been using HSBC in Geneva. Contrast that with what's been happening in the United States and in other countries where there's been a proper investigation and prosecutions. We seem to have been particularly lenient.
Just holding a bank account in a country like Switzerland, when you don't live there, isn't evidence that tax is being evaded, although it might provide a clue. France estimates that 99.8% of its citizens on the list were evading tax. Offshore accounts are not illegal in the UK, but many people use them to hide cash from the tax authorities. And while tax avoidance is perfectly legal, deliberately hiding money to evade tax is not. So why the lack of action over here?
We definitely do have one rule for white-collar tax avoiders and a different rule for people in the benefit system. But that's actually because, with regard to the benefit system, although it's wildly complicated, it's pretty clear when you've crossed the line. If you are turning up and claiming that you can't work because of a particular illness and it turns out that that was an untruth, it's very clear you've crossed a line and you can be prosecuted. We've made the entire tax arena so vastly complicated that it's difficult to work out which various lines people have crossed.
Measures to crack down on tax schemes are now as much part of Budget Day tradition as the Chancellor holding up his red box.
In the next Parliament, we can continue to crack down on tax avoidance, evasion and aggressive tax planning.
And here's Alistair Darling, sounding familiar 5 years ago.
I am determined to continue our successful drive to prevent avoidance and evasion.
So how big is this issue? Each year, HMRC estimates what it calls the tax gap, the difference between what should, in theory, be collected and how much money actually comes in. It estimates that in 2012-13, that gap was £34 billion, or almost 7% of all tax revenues due. But tax campaigners question these official estimates and put the figure much higher. They claim it stands at £120 billion. Whether we're talking about £35 billion or £120 billion, the tax gap is rather a lot of money. Now, not all of that gap relates to the kind of avoidance and evasion using overseas so-called tax havens that HSBC have been accused of taking part in, but quite a bit of it does. The thing about tax havens, though, is that there's no agreed international definition. What we can say is, it's not just about a low rate of tax. Crucially, it's also about secrecy and a lack of transparency. Many tax jurisdictions lack a registry of beneficial ownership. In other words, there is no way to see who ultimately owns the cash stashed in bank accounts there.
The UK wishes to take a leadership role. It could do it tomorrow. It could, for example, say to the Crown dependencies and the overseas territories, if you fail to put into place a public registry of ultimate beneficial ownership, now we will require you to do that.
Progress has been made on ending banking secrecy. Switzerland signed a deal with the UK in 2011, allowing for more information exchange. But, campaigners argue, if the UK was really serious about cracking down on tax avoidance and evasion, it would be taking more concrete steps. The first of which would be aggressively prosecuting those accused of aggressively avoiding tax.
Duncan, well done there. One sad sidebar to this story, by the way, is this: in one industry league table of the world's top 100 brands, Britain only has a handful, and HSBC is the top-ranked British one. Well, the bank's shame, however, still leaves the question, are we a soft touch when it comes to the clients among them tax dodgers? With me is Jason Collins, who's head of tax at Pinsent Masons. It's a legal firm. It does advise HSBC on tax matters. Jason Collins, many people are bemused as to why anybody would need to have a secret, undeclared bank account in Switzerland. Can you give us an example of a legitimate reason, that if you like, is a good business reason why you would want a secret bank account?
Well, I think there's a difference between having an offshore bank account and having a secret, undeclared bank account. There are plenty of legitimate reasons for having an offshore bank account.
Yeah.
I mean, in particular, if you are not from the UK originally, if you're what we classify as non-dom, when you come to the UK, our tax system encourages you to live here on the basis you don't pay tax on your offshore income unless you bring it into the UK.
Now, I can see why a foreign bank account, but why an undeclared or a secret one?
Well, I think if you look at the stats in relation to the particular stories today, actually 3/4 of those were actually had no tax liabilities connected to them at all. So,
yeah, so it's just the other quarter. What about why would people need an undeclared one? What good reason? Just an example of how someone would use it.
Well, if it's undeclared for tax purposes, clearly that's because they are engaging in tax. Right. Well, not to avoid tax, to evade tax. There's a very, very big difference between avoidance
illegal
and evasion.
evasion.
Well, yes, very much so.
And but can you give me some example of some other reason, why a good reason other than evading tax, that you might want one?
Well, I think people want banking secrecy for various reasons around privacy. And don't forget, not all parts of the world are quite the same here as they are here. Certain parts of the world you can be liable to kidnapping. Information about your wealth, once it gets out, can cause you some very serious personal security risks. That can be one reason for wanting to keep your wealth secret. But equally, I think keeping your wealth secret from the world is one thing. Keeping it secret from the tax authority has a legitimate interest in that in order to collect tax is another.
Can you think of a legitimate reason? I don't want to talk about specific cases, but a legitimate reason why someone might have a good use, a legal, legitimate use, business use, for £1 million of cash, bricks of money?
Well, I mean, you'll have to ask the people concerned about why they're taking cash out.
Can you think of one? I'm just.
Well, I suppose somebody wants to be paid in cash in relation to a particular business transaction.
Does that ever happen in a good way in business? Have you ever seen anything good come out of someone saying, "I need £1 million, you can have it in cash"?
Well, I suppose no, it's not a commonplace thing at all.
Right.
But you have to understand why that particular transaction.
Give us a reason why we have tax havens. Why does Britain not just say, you can't do business with tax havens? You can't put your money in a bank in a tax haven. You can't have anything to do with them. It's just not going to be allowed.
Well, I think the question is, what is a tax haven? I mean, if you're talking about a low tax jurisdiction, well, I think you'll probably find the UK itself is a low tax jurisdiction. If we're talking about banking secrecy or secrecy around what goes on in that jurisdiction, well, there are very few of those places left. And I think you'll find the ones that will typically be referred to as tax havens are now very transparent. They've all adopted things like the Common Reporting Standard, which will come into place in the next few years, around the disclosure of lots of information around people who hold financial assets in those countries.
The Swiss deal, the deal with Switzerland, which we made in 2011, effectively said you can take your money out of the Swiss bank account before the deal comes into effect. What was the point of that?
Well, I think when faced with this issue about knowing there are Swiss bank accounts out there which haven't been declared to the UK tax authorities, what do you do as a tax authority? You can go down the French or the American route, which is try to prosecute the bankers, or you can go down the route which the UK adopted, which was considered to be very innovative, around offering effectively immunity from prosecution to those bankers in return for opening up that banking market to scrutiny. And that was exactly what happened there. Yes, the people who had accounts in Switzerland were given 3 choices. It was either close the account, or disclose the account, or suffer an anonymous withholding tax.
Or take your money out and put it elsewhere.
Well, that's with the closing account,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But the Swiss authorities agreed to tell the revenue about the top 10 destinations where that money went. And now the revenue have that information, the number of people who are involved, and they'll be pursuing them vigorously.
Jason Collins, thank you very much. Well, with me now are 2 MPs from the Treasury Select Committee, Conservative Mark Garnier, Labour's John Mann. Mark Garnier, are you happy that all this has come out today?
Well, I'm happy that it's come out and there's a lot of conversation about this whole sort of pernicious issue.
Because the government have known it for 5 years, so I wonder why they didn't bother to tell us.
Well, I think, I don't know is a quick answer to that, and I can't really answer that question, but I think what is important is that, we are looking at this whole business of tax avoidance and actually trying to deal with it. As we heard in your piece, the tax gap is anything between 35 billion and 120 billion, and that, if we could resolve that one problem, we wouldn't have a budget deficit.
Well, this is the question. Why do you think nobody who appears to have been evading tax in the period after up to 2007. Why no one's been prosecuted, even though we were leaked files that told us
Well,
maybe some names?
but it's
one is what
no,
was
it's fair enough.
Yeah,
I mean, I think there are probably two answers to that. The first is actually, can they present a case that the Crown Prosecution Service can prosecute? And bear in mind, of course, this evidence was stolen evidence. So would that hold up in court? I mean, is that
seriously a reason not to prosecute?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but I think it's something which could be taken.
People have been remarkably unwilling to be aggressive about it and give it a go, haven't they?
Which is the second answer, which I was just coming to. I mean, the important point is at what point do you say, as a government, as an HMRC, we want to recover the money? Because, of course, if they go out to the, if you like, the low-hanging fruit to start off with and say, look, you get immunity, but you could potentially get a 200% fine, and on top of that you get interest charged, and on top of that you've got to pay the tax. That, of course, is bringing in money to the HMRC and bringing in money to the country. Now, to a certain extent, do you want to have complicated, convoluted prosecutions, or do you just want to get the money back? I suspect that what's probably happened is they've gone to the right starting point by going for the low-hanging fruit and giving anonymity. But from now on, now that we've got to this point where we've only got 1,100 bits of money, people have paid money back, that actually perhaps we should go for this hard, really sort of get stuck in and make the point.
Should start now.
And put people in prison.
John Mann, does that satisfy you as an explanation as to what's been going on under the last government and this one?
Well, the low-hanging fruit, and it's a few apples, isn't it, that we're getting, rather than the harvest, and that's the problem.
Well, we're getting some revenue out of people. Remember, we are now getting the revenue, so even people in the Panorama programme who haven't paid are now paying
we're talking about tax evasion and people who should have been paying taxes, and it creates unfair markets. Why should one company in this country be paying their taxes properly and legally and competing with another one who isn't? It's a very unfair market that's created, and
why is it? Why don't we do something about? What's your theory as to? I mean, chancellors want tax, don't they? The HMRC's job is to get tax in, and yet there does seem to be this very odd.
I think the culture that's been there has been that somehow the remnants of the empire that are there, that these offshore havens some way benefit us, especially compared to the rest of the world. In fact, I think the truth is exactly the opposite. We're losing out from tax revenues, and those who are paying the taxes in particular losing out. If we got this money in from these tax evaders, we could be reducing the deficit more, we could be spending more, we could be reducing tax more. None of that can happen because some people are avoiding large amounts of tax.
We don't seem to have got very much money out of this, Mark Garnier. We've got 135 million, haven't we? I mean, and for that, we've more or less given an amnesty to thousands of people who had undeclared money sitting in Swiss bank. And we don't even know where the money came from because, of course, it was undeclared.
Well, no, that's absolutely right. And I think if you divide it by the number of people divided by the number of years, I think it works out as sort of 35,000 per person or something. It's not very much at all per year, so it's quite a small amount of money. But look, I mean, it's 1,150, I think it is so far. There's now, 5,850 still to go. We need to kind of find out what's happening with them. Are they pursuable cases? Are they the low-hanging fruit that potentially could be do a deal with? Or more importantly, are they the more difficult ones that actually they should be prosecuted? I don't think anybody would disagree that we should see a few go to prison to set an example.
Okay, we need to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed.